Hello everyone, glad you could join me today. In this installment of the Witch from Mercury build series, we'll take a quick detour to Earth House and build Chuchu's Demi trainer. This kit marks the halfway point on this lineup, at least for kits in what I'm calling the first wave of the Witch from Mercury series, which for the most part encapsulates everything we've seen in the first season of the anime. But with that out of the way, let's get to work. This is the thinnest box we've seen so far, besides of course those expansion sets, which as far as I'm concerned shouldn't even be counted. Inside are three main runners for the Demi trainer itself. You get a slightly smaller runner for the beam rifle, which is shared with the Demi trainer expansion set, and a small clear piece for the eye sensor, as well as some stickers and wire. This build went together extremely fast. We're really venturing into 30-minute missions territory. Nothing stuck out to me as far as the actual build, it is that simple, but what I did notice right away was the molds. Across the board, Bandai has stepped up their game with mold technology, and the Demi trainer is no exception. It's really impressive. Anything that can be molded in one piece is. Pretty much all of the exterior components are a single piece, the only exception being some of the joints. The kit also has open hand parts, which is a first in this series. That being said, the hand parts are also included in that Demi trainer expansion set, but not with the standard Demi trainer kit, which is a shame. Overall, this kit is pretty neat. Not as much going for it technology-wise as something like the aerial, but for someone who wasn't expecting much from the simple design, it's a very nice surprise. The kit was primed in Mr. Surfacer 1000, I then sprayed a coat of Tamiya TS17 gloss aluminum, and in certain areas TS47 chrome yellow. While I do this physical chipping, I thought I'd discuss my plan for the project. Within the Witch from Mercury universe, Earth House is pretty poor, having to use an old mobile suit for their singular pilot. I liked this idea and wanted a Demi trainer which was modern, but 3 years of neglect found its way to Earth House and had to be refurbished as best as it could with limited funds. I chose yellow as an undercoat because it fits as a safety color for training, but also because this kit is part of a group build hosted by Midwest Hobbycraft using their store colors, and I wanted to use the yellow a bit more creatively than just as the main color. I also wanted to rework the exposed metallics. The aluminum just wasn't cutting it for me, and I'm using Mr. Metal Color paints for this. While researching the paints for my Lubris video, I read that they can tarnish over time, which sort of happened with the paint in my bottle, but while I was painting, the tarnished effect went away. It seems that only a small amount of the leftover paint tarnished, perhaps just the top layer. I am speculating because I only noticed this effect while painting. This did result in some metallic parts being a little brown, but that's not a problem on this build. It actually works well for the concept I had in mind. When painting with Mr. Metal Color, I use a dry brush, and it's also worth noting that I've never cleaned this brush ever since I started painting with these metallics on that Lubris build. I just haven't felt the need to since the brush isn't stiff, and I use the brush only for Mr. Metal Color paints. I figured that I should give the model a patina before painting the main color. It probably won't be seen, but I want to cover all my bases just in case. This is my standard patina mixture of a dark brown wash applied in the usual manner. I decided on using gray for the main color. It's one of the colors in the MHC color scheme, and it felt like a perfect choice. A few years ago, I remodeled my workshop on a tight budget, and the cheapest paint I could find was light gray. This was AD 2021. I imagine things would largely be the same in the Ad Stella timeline. While painting on this gray, I made the decision to use much more of it on the upper body than on the legs to sort of hint at the idea of Earth House running out of paint as they were finishing up. It isn't that much of a stretch to say that this paint job is on the messier side. I'm not using it as an excuse to just be sloppy, but if I get a small amount of spillage on the metallic areas, it isn't a problem. On areas where I want more of the yellow to be visible, I thin out the paint more. The extra water content makes the paint act more like a filter than as a base layer. On a similar note, I'm not painting gray on all these surfaces. The inside edges of certain plates or some of the details remain yellow. I was constantly thinking to myself, how would a bunch of high school kids paint a giant robot? I would think that some of them would view repainting the mobile suit as a bit of a chore, so neglecting some areas isn't out of the ordinary. This paint scheme is possibly the most monotone one I've ever done, and really brings me back to the old days of when I did military models and everything was a solid color, the most visually exciting thing being a unit insignia or a marking number. Very stimulating stuff, I know. Even on my usual builds where there's a single main color, I at least have an accent of some sort. Not the case here, and if you feel this is pretty boring, it's understandable. But in terms of a bunch of poor high schoolers with virtually no outside help, them being able to afford a single paint color makes sense. It reminds me of when I built models in high school, having to buy just 4 or 5 paints and mix all the colors I needed from there. Time to do some physical chipping. It's my favorite weathering step and one I find pretty relaxing. I'll start off with my usual method of just bouncing my metal tweezers across the kit surfaces, using their natural spring to create very random standalone chips. I'll also use the tweezers to create some scratches. I then use my hobby knife to really refine the areas of chipping, creating lots of edge wear and scratches. I'm really having fun with this step and being much less subtle than I usually am. This is definitely more stylistic, but I want to show off a lot of the yellow underneath and really allude to this Demi trainer's history. In the past, I try to go more realistic with how I chip paint, but this application is me turning my brain off and enjoying the process. Although this project is for a group build and a build series, at the end of the day, it's for me. And I have gotten comments about how crazy the chipping is on this build and how the colors don't really work together. While those are valid points, it was nice to do some overstated chipping just because. And yes, I realize just because shouldn't be a reason for someone who makes weekly semi-instructional videos on semi-realistic gunpla painting on why they do things, but sometimes you don't need a good reason to do things, you just do them. I sprayed a coat of Mr. Hobby Premium Top Coat Semi-Gloss, using it instead of the Super Clear because that paint can deteriorate Mr. Metal color. Now I'm doing decals, albeit very minimally. Because I had to come up with placement on my own, all the footage is in time-lapse. I apologize, but I was more concerned with getting these right. The decals are just some generic caution markings from Delphi. I chose light blue to stick with the MHC colors, just like the yellow. I want to introduce these colors in ways you might not think of at first. It's time for a pin wash. Because of the gray, I'm using a brown wash instead of the usual black. Just like in the last video, I forgot to buy a new brush for pin washes, so I am still using the slightly larger one I had to make do with. But the larger size and its messier result also fits the idea I had in mind. I was ready to face the idea of having to do lots of cleanup when I realized something somewhat concerning. I wasn't able to move any of the wash around. I think this may have had something to do with the top coat. Mr. Hobby's premium top coat is water-based, and I sprayed it while it was still pretty humid. So, while I let it dry for several hours and even used a hair dryer to get it as dry as possible, I still think the clear coat was slightly wet. It's sort of like that thing Bob Ross talks about, how a thin paint will stick to a thick one. But besides that small issue, the pin wash went pretty well. Because the Demi trainer is on the smaller end, there's less detail to cover, which means things happen a lot quicker. While that wash dries, I thought it would be the perfect time to paint some of the extra pieces. I'm tackling these bits and pieces in stages to show how some of these additions were added later in the life of this mobile suit. I chose blue just because it's the final color in the MHC color scheme. Using a blue like this does sort of go against my previous idea of not being blatant with these MHC colors, But the backpack looks like a fuel tank, so I wanted a brightish color without any gray. I really like this blue. I'm not too sure if I'll be able to work it into a future project. There aren't really any designs in this lineup that scream out "paint me blue," but I'll see what I can do. Those leg thrusters and the beam rifle are being painted basalt gray. I like the additional gray tones the basalt provides. As usual, basalt gray is a perfect color for anything generically mechanical, and it goes with any color I've used it with so far, and what a surprise, gray works perfectly well with gray. This gray has made an appearance on almost every build I've done, almost every video I've made, and yes, almost every kit in this lineup. It's just too good to pass on it. I'm painting the sensors pink. I knew I wanted pink since this is Chuchu's Demi trainer, but like a lot of colors, I didn't want the pink to be so obvious. I've seen so many customs of this kit painted pink and didn't want mine to seem like a copy of all of those builds. I might paint the standard Demi trainer pink though, that paint scheme is currently undecided. All of these additional parts need their details highlighted with a wash. Instead of the careful pin wash, I'm doing a grunge wash. This is achieved by painting a wash all over the part and wiping off all the excess with a paper towel. Afterwards, I'll use a paintbrush to rework the wash, adding and subtracting until I get a result that I like. I chose to apply a wash in this manner because it creates a more weathered appearance than the pin wash. This is important since I want these parts to look weathered, but not as weathered as I want the main Demi trainer body to be. It helps build on the idea that this suit was upgraded bit by bit. Time for a patina. This is just the usual method you've seen me do in pretty much every other video. I start by speckling a dark brown wash all over the kit, and when I think I've got enough, I'll streak it all down with a flat brush. Because this gray is much lighter than the colors I normally use, the result ended up being very heavy. But remember that pesky little thing about me not being able to do any cleanup on the pin wash? A similar thing happened with the patina. I found this wash acted like a normal acrylic instead of a wash mixture, since I was able to work at it for a much shorter time. I did think of using some rubbing alcohol heavily diluted with water to clean up all of the excess, but I was concerned about being too aggressive and cleaning my way down to the yellow or any of the layers underneath. But suffice to say, this patina and the speckling is a lot heavier than I normally like it. I sprayed a coat of Mr. Hobby's Premium Top Coat Flat, and I'll be adding some dust. First, I spread some heavily thin paint on the lower surfaces, and when that dries, speckle the paint on the lower areas to simulate splashes of earth from when the mobile suit walks around. I used a similar color to the dust tone on the Delonza build, which became invisible when it dried. But after that, our kit is done. Here's Chuchu's Demi trainer in the bare plastic. And here it is after a little work. I do like this one. Some things could be improved definitely, mainly how heavy that speckling is, but I do think the finished result shows what I intended. And as usual, this isn't meant to be an explicit statement on what to do with your own Gunpla, but more of a look into my own process. Next in this kit lineup is the Gundam Ferract, which is our first look into what Pale Technologies has to offer. It's a design that I've got a love-hate relationship with, the kit of which being a mixed bag, although we'll save that take for later. Hopefully a custom paint scheme puts some of my reservations to rest. But if you liked the video, consider supporting the channel. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next video, whenever that is.